guys, welcome back to another video. This is an article that came out last week. I think it was later in the week, and I didn't go over it, but it's very interesting as a lot of people have been talking about it. And I do want to go over this article and just talk about what is said in here. One of the main things right now with this deal is going to be the FTC in the United States on whether decisions that they make, whether they're going to pass it, whether they're going to block it, whether they're going to go all the way to August 2nd and fight this thing in court. Now, we just recently saw the CMA go back and remove any of their issues with the high-end console market, saying that they don't see in any way that Microsoft is going to either fully try to foreclose Sony or PlayStation or partially foreclose them, because it just makes absolutely no business sense. They did a bunch of calculations. They used the lifetime value of customers, and they came out and said that the numbers that they had originally used weren't the correct numbers, essentially. And when they recalculated everything, for Xbox and for Microsoft, for them to take Call of Duty off of the PlayStation platform will be bad for their business. So they have come to the new conclusion when it comes to the consoles. There is no anti-competitiveness stuff going on here. Now, they still have to make a final decision on the cloud, but we've already seen Microsoft put out tons of remedies with the 10-year deals for the cloud. So you could assume that those deals are going to have the CMA come to a similar decision as they did with the high-end console market. And you can assume that the EU is going to have a similar decision as the CMA. But one of the main things a lot of people are asking themselves is the FTC. It's the American Trade Commission, right? Why does it seem like, based off all the information we've seen, it's not just kind of out of nowhere, but all the information we've seen about the arguments that Sony have made, the arguments that Microsoft have made, why does it seem like they are looking out for the best interest of a Japanese company and looking out for the best interest of Sony compared to all of the evidence pointing towards this deal not being anti-competitive and bad for the video game industry? And this is an article here that kind of touches on this stuff, but it has to do with Japan colluding with antitrust regulators against Microsoft. So let's read through it. It says, while American politicians and the media focus on China's anti-competitive practices, similar practices in Japan go largely unnoticed. American auto manufacturers have long suffered from Japanese protectionism, and more recently, US tech and gaming companies have become targets. And I mean, Microsoft right now with this, it's a huge acquisition, to be fair, $70 billion. I mean, that's obviously going to be a target for regulators. They're going to do their due diligence. They're going to look into it. As of right now, it seems like everything that's happening is very, very normal, and that it is on track to close sometime this summer. The analysts at the beginning had said sometime in June, and it looks like that is what is going to be happening. If everyone goes ahead and passes this deal, it's really up to the FTC. Are they going to see the CMA make their decisions and the EU make their decisions and then still want to go to court? Or are they going to come to some sort of deal because the other major regulators have either passed it, or I guess at the same time could eventually block it? But right now it doesn't look like it is going that way. And in terms of the FTC as well, it does seem like Lina Khan, they are on a power trip. They want to be the ones in there that get that on the resume, that they did something in big tech and stopped a major acquisition. Continues on here, it says, a classic example of this Japanese protectionism is Sony and its PlayStation video game console, which controls more than 95% of the Japanese market for high-end consoles. And if you remember the quote last week as well from Maria Cantwell, which is the senator in Washington, and she said 98%. They obviously aren't including Nintendo in that number, right? Because the high-end console markets, the definition that has been created by these regulators is Xbox and PlayStation, not Nintendo included there. You put Nintendo there, obviously it's not 95 or 98%. The Japan Fair Trade Commission turns a blind eye as Sony violates Japan's antitrust laws with its aggressive efforts to stifle competition from its main competitor in the market, Microsoft, and its Xbox console subscription service. For example, Sony rewards game publishers for not distributing their games through Xbox. And you can just take a couple examples right at the top of your head that has happened. And for example, like we have Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy 16, both of those are major examples where Sony has obviously made great deals with Square Enix to not put those games on Xbox. And those are both, at the end of the day, mainstream, Western, JRPGs, you could say, if that makes any sense. But they are popular in the West, and people on Xbox would 100% go out and buy Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy 16. But Sony has come out, made deals, and they have rewarded these publishers for not putting them on Xbox. While that goes unpunished, the JFTC aggressively investigates American companies. And again, this is the major difference. You have the FTC here investigating an American company, and you have the JFTC also investigating a big American company. Meanwhile, the Federal Trade Commission, America's competition regulator, along with the Justice Department, is effectively aiding Sony's monopolization of the Japanese market by trying to block a merger that would help Microsoft compete in the gaming industry. And again, like just what I said at the beginning of this video, that's a big question a lot of people have. In December, the FTC filed a complaint seeking to prevent Microsoft from acquiring Activision, a publisher of video games, most famously Call of Duty. The FTC alleges that the deal will increase Microsoft's already considerable power in video games, such that Microsoft would have the ability and increased incentive to withhold or degrade Activision's gaming content in ways that substantially lessen the competition. The FTC is primarily concerned that Microsoft will use Call of Duty to attract gamers away from competitors and to Xbox. Now, what is really interesting about this statement that the FTC has made is that the CMA now has essentially debunked all of that with the recent documents that have come out. They're basically saying even if they were to do these things, it's not going to be financially beneficial for Microsoft. So they have no incentive to foreclose or partially foreclose PlayStation with Call of Duty. So that statement there, the FTC must look at what the CMA has said, and I'm sure they will. And they're probably going to come to that similar conclusion at the end of the day. At least that's my assumption based off of a lot of the things that I'm reading. Continues here, it says, never mind that Sony's PlayStation controls about 70% of the worldwide and nearly 60% of the American market for high-end gaming consoles, the market segment the FTC's complaint focuses on. In reality, the proposed merger would increase competition in the gaming industry by allowing Xbox to challenge Sony's dominance. And as a gamer, as I do my videos, I read through the comments, I did a stream this weekend, and just talking with you guys, like that's one of the main things that most people are excited about, I think, is that Xbox is now going to be able to challenge the dominance of Sony, which is going to create more competition for gamers, for the market, and give people just a better product at the end of the day across the entire board from PlayStation and from Xbox. Because as of right now, Xbox, you can see they are competing very, very hard, but there is that element of how dominant PlayStation is in certain parts of the world, and just in general, based off of the PS4 generation, they absolutely destroyed the Xbox in many different areas. And now a lot of that with this deal, the entire landscape throughout the video game industry, I think, is going to be changing, as this is the biggest deal in gaming history. And Microsoft is going to have one of the most, if not the most powerful franchise in video games, which is Call of Duty, with the amount of money they make. So they could take so much money, reinvest it into their studios, and then continue to bring out big, high quality first party games where the narrative in people's minds will eventually change, where it won't just be that Sony has the highest quality first party games. People will start saying the Xbox has just as high of quality, if not higher quality, and that's going to push both of these companies to continue to bring out their best products. Continues here and says, consider the juxtaposition. While the JFTC overlooks Sony's long entrenched monopoly in Japan, the FTC is going after a merger whose only threat to competition is purely speculative. And that's exactly right, in my opinion. It all is just purely speculative, this threat to the competition. One factor behind the FTC's misguided effort is Sony's aggressive lobbying of the FTC, as well as European antitrust regulators, suggesting worst-case scenarios to justify regulatory intervention in the Activision deal. So focused is Sony on stifling competition from Xbox that it has refused Microsoft's offer of a deal that would allay the FTC's concerns about Microsoft withholding or degrading Call of Duty. The 10-year deal would give Sony more favorable access to Call of Duty on PlayStation than it currently enjoys. Similar deals to ensure post-merger access to Activision games have already been accepted by Nvidia and Boosteroid, which both offer cloud gaming services, and Nintendo, maker of the Switch gaming console. And the 10-year deal, to me, is just such a telling thing, because they've offered the 10-year deal to Sony, and not only have they offered it, they've said, hey, like, we will sit down and we will make sure that this deal, if you don't like it in its current state, we will change it so that it meets your needs of what you want this deal to say. I mean, obviously across a reasonable line, right? Like, there's going to be stuff that they won't budge on, but they will make changes reasonably to make a deal that Sony will accept. And they outright have said, then it's a quote from Lulu Chang Mesrve, who said, that Jim Ryan says that they don't want a deal for Call of Duty. They just want to block the merger. And then you have companies like Nintendo, who are just as prominent as PlayStation, just as prominent as Xbox, maybe even more, to be completely honest, both of them have signed the 10-year deal. So if the deal was that terrible, why would Nintendo sign that 10-year deal? It just doesn't make any sense. And you have PlayStation coming out literally saying that Call of Duty is the pillar of their entire business. They lose Call of Duty, they're done. That's essentially a lot of the things that they are insinuating here with the arguments that they have been making, which would then call into question their entire first-party games, all of the business with that. How has it been that poor? Or how have they kind of pulled the veil over us, or pulled the cover over our eyes, and made everyone believe that their first party was the thing that ran PlayStation and that held the business up? They're essentially saying it isn't that, it is Call of Duty, which I personally don't believe, but I mean, I don't see the numbers that they are presenting to the CMA and to the EU, so maybe there is validity in that. Common sense alone ensures that Microsoft won't use control of Activision games to deny or degrade access on the PlayStation. It makes no sense for Microsoft to spend billions of dollars to acquire those games only to forsake most of the revenue from the games by cutting off the users who play them on the dominant platform, Sony's PlayStation. And I like how they say common sense alone is how you can come to this conclusion, because that's just the only way I'm coming to this conclusion. And a lot of people, a lot of the gamers out there like me who are just following what is going on, common sense would tell you it makes zero sense for Xbox to take Call of Duty off of PlayStation or even degrade the game whatsoever on the platform. Continues here and says, the failure of that logic to deter the FTC lends support to the suspicion that its attempt to block the deal is more of an ideological crusade than is the result of an objective investigation. Suspicion is inevitable given that Lina Khan, the woman President Biden chose to lead the FTC, has openly expressed hostility to our nation's largest tech company, of which Microsoft is one. And to be clear, I'm Canadian, so I don't know everything about American politics, but at the end of the day, as an outsider looking in on this, that's what it looks like. It literally just looks like it is Lina Khan here on a power trip and just wants to be the person known to have blocked this deal. And that's what the end goal is, but it's going to be very hard for that to happen now with the stuff that has come out from the CMA and just what's going to come out in the future, especially if the CMA officially approves this deal with those cloud remedies that Microsoft has already essentially done with offering all those 10-year deals. The hostility was evident in the FTC's failed attempt to block the acquisition of Within Unlimited, a virtual reality startup by Meta, the parent company of Facebook. The FTC dropped the case last month after a federal judge rebuffed its efforts to enjoin the merger, despite the defense courts ordinarily show to executive agencies. Now they say here, said the Wall Street Journal, the federal court decision appears to vindicate claims that the FTC overreached by bringing a flawed antitrust case. The case is also widely seen as emblematic of FTC Chair Lina Khan's opposition to the expansion of big technology companies. So, I mean, there you have it. That's an example that's obviously going to be used. They probably would bring that up too if this did get to go to court, and as something that they could look to and say, hey, look at this overreach here. They're doing the same thing here with Xbox, with Microsoft, and the end result will probably end up being the same. It may be fashionable in many circles to bash Facebook, Microsoft, and America's other tech giants, but they employ hundreds of thousands of Americans to provide much of the technological innovation that benefits American consumers. All of that is threatened by the status quo, in which the Biden administration does little to combat Japanese protectionism, while its FTC appointees and its competition policy generally treat American tech companies as the enemy. If President Biden is serious about helping American workers, strengthening the economy, and promoting innovation, there are two things he should do immediately. First, before the United States and the other G7 countries head to Hiroshima, Japan, this May, to discuss economic and trade policy, among other global issues, the president should instruct the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative to demand fair competition in Japan for American companies. That's a huge thing. If you're Xbox and you're seeing this, you would want that to happen, of course. You would want Xbox to have a better chance in Japan, because that's the market right now where they're very far behind. They have tons of opportunity there. You can see what they are doing with Game Pass. You can see what they are doing with allowing gamers to play these games on their mobile phones, and mobile game, as we know, is a massive part of the Japanese market. And getting more Japanese games into Game Pass, we are continuously seeing that. I mean, we're just getting Ni no Kuni that just dropped into Xbox Game Pass, which would be a hit. And we've seen all the Final Fantasy stuff, the Dragon Quests, and many other games, even Guilty Gear Strive, the fighting game, which I've been playing a bunch of recently, an incredible fighting game that is huge over there. All of that stuff, you can see Xbox is kind of trying to get more and more opportunities in Japan, and customers in Japan who pick up an Xbox, who play Game Pass, they want them to be invested when they go through and see all of these games that would appeal to them. And it finishes off here and says, second, President Biden should remind both the FTC and the Justice Department that the purpose of our antitrust laws is to promote competition and innovation in the service of consumer welfare, not to impede the growth of success of large American companies in the service of a big is bad agenda. If the FTC listens to that message, it will drop its opposition to the Activision merger, or at the very least reach a settlement that incorporates the sort of legally enforceable obligations that Microsoft has offered to Sony and agreed to with other gaming companies. So that's the article. I just found it pretty interesting because it's a question that I've mentioned in other videos that I've always had in my mind. It's just odd, as an outsider looking in specifically, that you see the FTC out here seemingly going to bat for Sony, which is the only third party trying to stop this deal. And the arguments that Sony have made are just not very good. If they had made extremely compelling arguments, I 100% would be on here on YouTube. I know a lot of you may not believe me, but if they had made extremely compelling arguments, I'd be, hey, you know what? Those are good arguments by Sony. And I actually have done that by reading through some of the stuff that they have said, which I would say, you know, that is a valid thing as PlayStation to actually worry about. I've made comments like that, but in general, they're the only third party right now, or the only party in looking at this deal, opposing it. And the arguments they're making just make zero sense. And the CMA, the ball has started to roll where they have recognized that, yeah, it doesn't really make sense. There is no way that they're going to go out there and try to foreclose or even partially foreclose Sony by taking games off of the dominant platform where they will be getting tons of money all the time paid to them for the Activision Blizzard games. But I'm going to leave it there, guys. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up. If you're new here, hit that subscribe. Appreciate all the support, guys, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.